impact on holistic students. This is very clear that we have Penny Jane Burke, and I'm very, very honored to have these two remarkable names and experts. Penny Jane Burke is a Global Innovation Chair of Equity, and she's a director at the Center of Excellence in Equity and Higher Education at the University of Newcastle, Australia. And Helen GENG is an assistant professor of teaching in the science unit at the Mainland University, Hong Kong. Two remarkable ladies, academics rather than using that word. I'm sorry for the feminist jargon if that is so. May I say that the session for today is talking about, the agenda for today is educational inequity, in which we are talking about we will map, and I think Penny is picking up the first three dots that you see, the areas, themes that you see on the agenda. She will map multiple dimensions of education inequity and help us analyze the causes of marginalization. She will also examine inequities in education across different socio-cultural contexts and the broader implication that it carries. And of course, then she will look at it and help us get aware of the social justice framework and how inequity in higher education works. Helen will then take over after Penny opens the session. We will then later invite Helen to talk about holistic student development and how inequity impacts students' holistic development. And we are very, very conscious in a series, as you must have seen, that we are not talking only of academic success. We are talking of an individual, as a whole person, to the student success, to the success of the individual. And our basis came from this, this diversity wheel, which you can see was adapted from Loden et al. 1990, and I find it's very powerful. As you will see that there are 5 layers in this, starting from your personality, who you are, multiple factors within that, internal factors that also talk about your family and your location and status. Then there are those external factors that make a difference, impact on you. These are about citizenships, external factors are about citizenship and about geographical location. I'm sorry, I mixed up the internal factors and the external. And then, of course, there are the institutional factors you can see. And then there's the era that we live in. And the era that we live in right now is becoming very, very lots of friction and divisiveness. We have we have also to realize that diversity is not as simplistic, and I'm sure Penny probably will talk about it, that there are multiple dimensions within each of these 23 elements that make each one of us unique in our own way. You will not see anybody who you would say is 2 people or 2 persons are the same, because the personality, age and gender, even then there will be multiple dimensions. Religion, your depth and intensity of your understanding or your practice about those factors will make all the difference of how diverse you are. So without much ado, I am going to just to tell you that right now we have over 300 registrations. I'm not very sure from what parts of the world will show by and by, but our participants, but there were 2,320 registrations, where 76 are from our own campus, and there are 2,200 plus which are not from our campus. Of those, 123 are international, from 50 countries of the world, and there are 2,000 plus national registrations from 400 of our national campuses. So we are very honored by all shown their confidence in our efforts. And may I also say that it is a collaboration with NAHE. Those of you that are Pakistan must be knowing that National Academy of Higher Education is the national unit that's responsible for professional development of campus higher education faculty. We're nearly 10 minutes into it. Penny, may I introduce you a bit more? Uh, you have, there's a lot of what is very remarkable is, and I'm very impressed, is that you are a UNESCO chair in equity, social justice, and higher education. And sometimes I marvel how I got a perfect person. I was able to find you the perfect person for this opening, session and for laying the foundation for the rest of the webinars. You have a personal experience of accessing higher education over 3 decades. Wow. And tenacious commitment to equity and social justice. You're dedicated to generating critical time, space, and resources for collective and reflection, action and reflection in reimagining higher education. And you published widely, of course. And our most recent book is Equity in Higher Education, Time for Social Justice Practice. And you have held positions of Global Chair of Social Innovation at University of Bath. And you have also been a Professor of Education at the University of Sussex, University of Roehampton, and a Reader at the Institute of Education, University of London. So I see that you hold a position now in Australia, but you have lots of positions also in UK. So I wonder if you're traveling between the two places, or are you? Oh, wow. So there's a lot of travel. No, over to you, Penny.
Thank you so much, Roxana, and thank you very much for inviting me to this
development success
wonderful webinar series. It's a real honor and a privilege to be
support system
part of
pedagogies and transformative
webinars.
Plus,
I'm
how
sorry.
to build effective campus community partnerships and sustain.
I'm sorry, we're trying to, there are multiple desks on my in CLT where different people are manning different things and things are mixing up. Okay, over to you.
No, I was just saying thank you very much. And, it's a wonderful thing to be part of this webinar series with so many people who are dedicated to making a difference through higher education, a passion that I really share. And as you said, I've been doing this work for 30 years now, and I came into this field because I myself had accessed higher education against the odds and became really dedicated at that point in the early 1990s to advocating for marginalized communities to have access to higher education and to participate on a level playing field. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my most recent work, but it is actually a body of work that I have developed over many years. And I should just say that I am joining you from the unceded lands of the Awabakal and Worimi peoples, where I'm very fortunate to live, a beautiful place, and acknowledge the wisdom and knowledges of First Nations people, elders past, present, and future, and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledges for the work we do around building more equitable higher education. So can we go to the next slide, please? Unfortunately, I can't share my slides, so I'm going to have to every time say, can we go to the next slide, please? So I just want to start off by saying, in thinking about advancing equity, I always want to use the word meaningful because we do have a lot of commitments to equity in different institutions, but sometimes those can be tokenistic. And so I think everybody is here because they really want to develop some depth to the work that they do. And that takes care and attention on an everyday basis. And I feel the same for myself. You're never really an expert because you need to keep challenging yourself to think about the complexities around lived experiences of inequities, injustices, and inequalities and how they affect higher education and higher education access and participation. But I think it's very important that we start by thinking about the incredible knowledges experiences and insights of communities who have navigated inequities, trauma, and injustices. So they bring a wealth of experience to higher education. We also need to continuously build our capacity of our leaders, our staff, and students. And I think that's why this webinar is so valuable. So thank you to Roxana and her colleagues for facilitating something so important. It's so important that we avoid tokenistic, superficial, or instrumental strategies or interventions because they have no sustainability. They won't be effective long term. They may make a difference to to some people, but long term they won't make a big change to our system structures and cultures. And they may also not only undermine quality of what we're doing, but unwittingly reproduce harmful inequities because we're not really paying attention to the complexities of how inequities are produced and reproduced in and through higher education. And in this way, inclusion can become a form of symbolic violence in itself when it's rooted in assimilation, forcing people and communities who've been excluded to conform to the dominant order or to conform to the dominant cultural value systems. So what we really need, and this is what I'm going to talk about, is sustainable transformation, which is rooted in an understanding of what I call multidimensional inequities and the ways that those multidimensional inequities intersect. So Fatima, can I have the next slide, please? So in my body of work, these are some of the books that I have published over the years. I have been, as a sociologist, I should say that I'm a sociologist of higher education. So I'm coming from that idea of our sociological imagination being really important to think about what we take for granted, those taken for granted practices that seem harmless, but then can actually be complicit in the reproduction of inequalities and inequities. And one of the kind of things that I've argued is that we can provoke our imaginations to do things differently. We don't have to accept the status quo as it is, as if there is no alternative. We can do that, especially when we work collectively through critical questioning. And one of the questions that I want to pose is, the fundamental question of what is the purpose of higher education? So if we're trying to widen participation, why? What is the purpose of engaging with higher education? Who decides? Who participates? And who participates on what terms? And this is connected to, really big questions about what kind of world do we want to nurture? What kind of future do we want to nurture through higher education participation? In Australia, we talk a lot about job-ready graduates or employability. And I would argue that might be one dimension of the purpose of higher education, to ensure that people have access to meaningful work. But it's not the only reason that they would participate in higher education, and it is not the only purpose of higher education. And the other question I want to ask to provoke our collective imaginations is, what happens when we sustain a kind of orientation towards ignorance, and that might be unwitting. So it's not ignorance in that sense, but ignoring the ways that complex inequities are entrenched, indeed, in higher education system structures, cultures, and practices. So often we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion without a real deep discussion about what we mean by that, what lies beneath that, those histories of exclusion and marginalization, which are really important because higher education is such a powerful social institution that legitimates and validates and values particular bodies of knowledge and not others. And that has implications for how people are valued as well. So, what is the long-term harm that could be caused by that unwitting ignorance of those inequalities and inequities that form higher education practices. So next slide, please, Fatima. Thank you. So drawing, as a UNESCO chair, I'm obviously very interested in the work that UNESCO has been producing and a strong advocate of this work. UNESCO argues that the urgencies of our times are a matter for higher education, that higher education can be mobilized for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which include social dimensions such as reducing inequalities, building gender equality, ensuring peaceful democratic societies, and ensuring access to quality education. And, thinking about those urgencies around what we're witnessing of gross widening inequalities, growing divisions, conflicts, and violence, the diminishing of democracy and peace in the world, and environmental degradation and injustice, all of which are intersecting. So all 17 SDGs have to be treated as intersecting, which is really challenging. It means that we need to think in interdisciplinary ways and really bring our collective knowledges together to think about, how higher education can be mobilized for those purposes. And higher education equity is often treated as if it is a neutral site. So it's just about getting people into higher education who have historically been underrepresented. But I would argue that higher education is never outside of geopolitical dynamics. And building equity and diversity and inclusion in higher education has to recognize its relationship to broader relations of injustice and inequality. So it's never simply about fitting students in, and certainly not about fitting equity students in. And that in itself is a really problematic way to refer to groups of people who have been systematically marginalized from participating in the project of higher education. It's also really important to recognize that higher education can be transformative, and it has this incredible transformative potential, which is one of the reasons that, I have maintained my energy and my commitment to arguing for equity in higher education. But it is also reproductive. So, social inequalities don't just happen outside of higher education. Higher education is part of the social architecture in which inequalities and inequities are reproduced. So we have to understand and think about, what does that look like? What are we, how are we complicit in the reproduction of those inequities? And so we really need to broaden the scope of our imaginaries around what and who higher education is for, and it's for these wider social problems, which are actually feeling increasingly urgent, as I think Roxana sort of alluded to earlier. And as I said, it's really important to think about not only fitting students in from historically marginalized communities, but also recognizing the knowledges that they bring, the insights, the experiences they bring, and how they can become catalysts for change so that we can learn with them to think and deepen our approaches to equity and inclusion in higher education. So next slide, please, Fatima. Thank you. So one of the things that I've argued for is that what we really need to do is counter the impulse and tendency of lots of equity agendas towards what I call deficit imaginaries. I use this word imaginaries deliberately. We often talk about deficit models, deficit discourses. All of that is very important. The reason that I use imaginaries is to think about how we construct the problem of equity in ways that re-entrenches a deficit imaginary of the problem. So when we think about equity in particular ways, deficit is actually embedded in the logic of the way we're thinking about equity. So we often think about it in terms of deficiencies, individual deficiencies, rather than systematic and structural inequality or inequity. And we focus on changing individual attitudes. So one example of that would be, a kind of move towards thinking that the problem for women's participation in higher education, and in particular STEM subjects, is that or promotion to top positions, in higher education, is because they lack confidence. So that re-entrenches a notion of deficit, that the problem is in women's lack of confidence and not in the structural inequities that produce gender inequities as well. So we need to think about the relationship and the intersection across personal experience of the world and personal positioning and identity, and those social structures, cultures, and practices that reproduce the conditions in which people are disadvantaged. So if we only look at lack of confidence and just have some training for women to build their confidence or to produce better CVs, we're not actually going to have any kind of long-term sustainable transformation in which we achieve gender equality. I'm going to go to the next slide. I do refer here to identifying barriers as a problem, not because we don't need to understand barriers. We do, and it's really important, and I'm going to talk about why in just a moment. But we're so fixed on the idea of barriers, which are measurable, concrete, observable things that we can collect data about, that we tend to ignore the more insidious inequities, which we can't measure, we can't see. And often when we live those experiences of inequity on an everyday basis, it's very hard to articulate those experiences as a form of discrimination, because they're not measurable, they're not observable, they're not things that are easily that are easy to articulate. So when we focus primarily on evidence through data production, through metrics and measurement, we forget to look at those more insidious inequities and how they're reproduced through our everyday practices. And this tends to be dehumanizing because we're only looking at data. We're not looking at the lived experiences behind that data. And we're all inequities have been produced. So it's both dehumanizing and decontextualizing. And as I said, this tends to conceal the insidious inequity and trauma that's formed through everyday lived experiences of marginalization, even while we claim to be deeply committed to equity as an institution. And I have argued that this is a form of institutionalized gaslighting, because it's very hard for people to then be able to speak out about their everyday experiences. And I have a quote here from one of my recent research projects, which I don't have time to talk about, but I feel that this particular senior academic woman who's talking about being a woman in STEM as a death by 1,000 cuts is a very powerful statement that helps to understand what I mean by institutionalized gaslighting. So, what she's talking about are things that she experiences on an everyday basis that she can't actually report or easily talk about because they're more hidden, they're not measurable. We also tend to, I've already talked a little bit about how equity can become individualized. So about correcting or fixing the perceived deficiencies. So our gaze tends to be on fixing the attitudes of individuals who are disadvantaged, rather than looking at transforming systems, structures, cultures, and practices that create the conditions for that disadvantage. And the reason I put the word peripherized there is because equity itself tends to be on the peripheries of higher education. So we tend to have units or separate tasked with building equity. We might even have one individual who's tasked with building equity in the institution, and it's not necessarily embedded in our core practices around teaching and research, teaching, learning, and research, which puts equity in the peripheries and perpetuates the view that equity only belongs to those bodies that are constructed as disadvantaged. And this is deeply stigmatizing for people who are associated with equity categorizations or equity policy, because they stand out as being disadvantaged. And through the deficit imaginary, that produces assumptions about their lack or their deficiency or things that they need to fix to be an ideal student or to fit into the dominant order. And in this way, in trying to force people to fit in to systems that are inequitable, this is a form of you're losing yourself to be able to change yourself to become to be a proper student of higher education. So in this way, individuals are made responsible for overcoming disadvantage and trauma through discourses such as resilience. Now, there's nothing wrong with the discourse of resilience, because many students who have navigated complex inequities are deeply resilient and amazingly resilient. But resilience, again, is often couched in a deficit imaginary in which the student associated with equity is seen to lack resilience. So it's problematic. And by just continuously developing interventions and strategies around equity in these kinds of ways, we're trapped in a vicious circle in which we perpetuate the very inequities we're seeking to remedy, because we're not getting underneath and we can't understand what are the root causes of those inequities. So, Fatima, can I have the next slide, please? So in our book, my book with Matt Lum, which is just hot off the press, it's just been published this year, we argue that we need to move away from these deficit imaginaries, what we call monodimensional thinking, which focuses on one aspect of equity. So in Australia, for example, we often talk about low socioeconomic status students, LSES students. And that's problematic because, again, it locates the problem of socioeconomic inequity in the person who suffered that inequity. So they become marked as carrying that inequity rather than thinking about what are the structures that perpetuate socioeconomic inequities that then undermine a person's capacity to fully participate in higher education. So we need to move to a multidimensional social justice reframing of equity is what Matt and I argue in our book. Next slide, please, Fatima. So we've drawn, and I've drawn throughout the body of my work actually, quite heavily on Nancy Fraser's work. Nancy Fraser is looking at a much broader picture of social injustices and how social injustices are produced. It's a very compelling framework that she offers, and I've recontextualized Fraser's work in the context of higher education to think about how her different dimensions of injustice can be applied to higher education to understand better how those inequities get reproduced in higher education. So the mention about which being denied access to the fundamental quality resources and opportunities one requires to participate as an equal peer in society. And we can see how that would play out to undermine equity in higher education. So we need a redistributive equity approach, which is concerned, and this is more about the barriers. It's actually understanding that those are things that can be measured when we don't have access to meaningful quality forms of resources and financial resources as well to cover the cost of study, to have materials and books and technologies, the high quality educational opportunities, childcare, safe and secure housing, nutritious food, transportation, safe transportation, and so on and so forth. So, there's a whole range of redistributive equity dimensions that we can think about that would undermine a person's participation in higher education. Next slide, please, Fatima. So the next dimension of inequity or injustice that Fraser talks about that I've now reapplied to higher education is what she calls misrecognition. And misrecognition is the inequitable cultural value order that leads to subjugation, oppression, exclusion, status subordination, and so on. And we can think about that in higher education in the ways I was just talking about deficit imaginaries, that imaginary constructs the student associated with equity as deficient, as less than, as not a proper student, and that becomes internalized in the person. So it becomes a sense of not being good enough or not belonging, not seeing yourself as a worthy student, and so on, but also in other ways being constructed that way by people who have power to determine your life chances, to determine whether or not you should have access to higher education, which comes back to my idea around my book, The Right to Higher Education. Who is seen as having the right to higher education and on what terms? So this is about recognitive equity in higher education would be about really interrogating some of the categorizations that we use without thinking critically about those, but that stigmatize particular groups of students. It's also about ensuring that we recognize and value the knowledges, values, and perspectives of the students who are navigating those inequalities, and that we reject tokenistic celebrations of diversity. And I love this quote from Pamela Barnett, who says, given the entrenchment of racism globally expressed in all kinds of structures, sometimes in violence and even genocide, there is a tremendous need for people to know about and understand each other, to learn how to live together and solve common problems. So she's talking about a recognitive equity in my mind that is bigger than simply how we treat individual students, that thinks about how we teach, how we learn together, and how we learn a different way of being, which is embedded in a framework of compassion, empathy, understanding our differences, and learning with and from each other. Next slide, please, Fatima. And then Fraser talks about misrepresentation. So misrepresentation is political exclusion. It's not having a voice. It's not being able to determine the terms in which you or your community is being represented in key decision-making processes that affects your own life. So it has huge consequences. And Fraser talks about an expanded concept of parity of participation. She says this is not about numbers. It's about a qualitative condition of being an equal peer, participating as an equal peer, where your personhood is equally recognized and valued as anybody else. So you could see how this is deeply connected with misrecognition. If your personhood is not recognized and valued and is subjugated, then you don't have full representation. Even if you are, you're a representative on a university committee, your voice may not be heard equally in that committee because of the history of subjugation or subordination tied to what you're seen to be representing. So these kinds of complexities demand that we think much more carefully and in a much more nuanced way about representation. So I would argue this means, for example, that we work much more collaboratively. Of course, universities are moving much more towards hyper-individual competitiveness, notions of individual success, which undermine our capacity to collaborate, to cooperate, to provide collective spaces, to think together, and in non-hierarchical ways where everybody has an equal voice. So genuine partnerships with students and communities who have otherwise been marginalized from the development of equity, policy and practice, and also higher education development as well. Fatima, can I have the next slide, please? So in our book, we present a multidimensional framework for thinking about what we call transformative equity. And I can't do justice to the work today because I don't have enough time. But if you are interested in learning more about it, we go into great detail in the book about not only Nancy Fraser's work, but we weave together that work with all other social justice theories, feminist, decolonial, anti-racist, critical theories and methodologies that can help us to understand the intersectional nature of how inequities are produced and reproduced through higher education, but also help us to think about a social justice framework that would enable us to redress those inequities, to deepen our approaches to equity so that we can genuinely engage with these otherwise concealed inequities. So coming back to those ideas, this would involve holding together redistribution, recognition, and representation. So we don't see these as separate. And this is the challenge, I suppose, is that at any time we need to hold together a politics of redistribution, recognition, representation, understanding that those social justice principles also relate to anti-racist, anti-sexist approaches that help to redress all of the different kinds of forces of oppression, such as ableism, such as ageism, heterosexism, and so on and so forth, that are almost hidden by our equity, diversity, and inclusion language because we're never referring to those explicitly. And the overall aim of the multidimensional framework is to move towards flourishing and well-being of all members of the educational community to thrive and to experience parity of participation as fully valued and recognized members in fostering the conditions for inclusion, excellence, and transformation. I don't have time to talk about excellence, but excellence is another aspect of higher education discourse that pulls us in a different direction quite often. Something we don't look at. What's the relationship between excellence and equity? I don't have time to talk about that tonight, but again, if you're interested, we do talk about that at some length in our book. So Fatima, can you please go to the next slide? So we introduced the idea of POEMs, which is we call it a pedagogical methodology. And the idea is that when we use the word methodology, we're not only talking about research, we're talking about all practices associated with equity. So it could be our evaluation approaches, it could be our programmatic development of, our teaching and learning programs or our equity programs. So it's a whole range of things, including research. So we're thinking about methodology in a broader sense as all that we do and the way that we do it, because we often leap to just doing things and not thinking about how we do them. So we argue for a praxis-based approach, which really holds together critical reflection and critical action and ongoing dialogue. And in order to do that, one of the challenges for us here is, yes, we can do that on an individual basis, but it's so much more powerful when we do that collectively. And so we need the time, space, and resources to sustain that commitment to critical dialogic action reflection. In terms of the pedagogical, this is about opening a space of learning with, learning together, making meaning together, generating knowledge through collaboration and participation. So it's not just the formal classroom, but it's the way that we make meaning in and through higher education, even about equity itself. A deeply ethically oriented framework that's underpinned by redistributive, recognitive, representative principles, that's guided by a deep ethics of care, responsibility, and that responsibility is purposely spelled that way because it's about a responsiveness. It's about listening to and being with and learning with others who are different from ourselves within a relational, so one that understands we're not just individuals operating in the world, we're deeply interdependent and interconnected. And methodologies that avoid the decontextualization and dehumanizing methods of data collection and analysis that I had already spoken about. And flourishing and well-being, supporting all participants to thrive through collaborative, transformative social justice principles and frameworks. Next slide, please, Fatima. I'm just aware of the time, Roxana. I've got a lot more to go, and I might just not go through all of my slides because I think I've got too much here. But ethical reflexivity is more than just looking at ourselves. It's about positioning a position of questioning that is like a magnifying glass to help us to collaboratively examine the almost invisible manifestations of generations of oppression, violence, and injustice that, you know, it's not just about what we do now, it's about understanding those histories of inequity that have created intergenerational exclusion from higher education. And so it takes a lot more nuance to think about what we do about that, how we change our practices. Next slide, please. So I talk a lot about changing communities of practice, which are so important in our lives because our communities of practice are where we share our commitment to our discipline or our subject, to as teachers, as professionals. They're really important spaces, but they can also be spaces where our shared values are taken for granted because we share them and we can't see them. So the idea of moving towards communities of praxis would involve another layer of collectively interrogating those shared values and assumptions to think about, you know, what we're taking for granted when we talk about success, who's seen as successful and on what terms, excellence, you know, what is viewed as excellent, especially when we use words like the best and the brightest. What are the exclusionary effects of those kinds of projections of ability, capability, potential, talent, merit, and so on, which have real powerful effects. So it's really about attending to complex power dynamics that are otherwise rendered invisible and exercising that ethical reflexivity I was talking about before, and understanding that inequities are produced through practice, that practice matters, and what we do and how we do it really matters. And transformation is grounded in a kind of sense of mutual care, that ethics of care I talked about, reciprocity, and collaboration. So, you know, we then are committed to sustaining meaningful relationships with our students and communities and with each other, and challenging toxic, hyper-individualistic competitiveness, which is becoming increasingly apparent, I would argue, in our structures around the way we talk about excellence and success in higher education. So next slide, please. I think I might have to skip over my case study, unfortunately. I wanted to
Penny,
share,
yeah,
yes,
very quickly, I was going to say, since we are going to share your slides, all of the material with everybody
yeah,
afterwards, perhaps you could take over the big, the mega themes and sort of the smaller themes. You could sort of just refer that these are some of the themes that fall under this big theme, and
yes,
everybody will have these materials, and they
yeah.
can always come back to you if there is a question that they want to ask.
Absolutely. So what I had wanted to do, but I was being way too ambitious with my time, was to share with you a case study around which would show how misrecognition, maldistribution, and misrepresentation work to continuously exclude students who have suffered gender-based violence, which affects 1 in 3 women in the world. So, I mean, it's a massive social problem that's invisible in our discussions around equity. But of course, it has so much to do with gender inequity. Gender inequity manifests in gender-based violence. We're ignoring the impact of that on access and participation in higher education, but it has massive effects. So I wanted to share with you some of that work. But again, it's on the slides. You can also read my work about that. And we're publishing more work at the moment if you're interested. So Fatima, I might ask you just to, sorry that you have to try to control this, but if you can get to my final, kind of my almost final slide. So if you keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So finally, I just want to reflect on how much I want to emphasize that practice matters. What we do and how we do it really matters. It's not outside, but situated within power dynamics that reproduce exclusion, violence, and injustice. That we need to understand, we need to sort of flip. And this is not just a strength-based approach. It's a recognitive justice approach to understanding that the knowledges, experiences, and insights that communities who have been excluded from higher education can bring to our efforts to transform higher education for equity are incredibly valuable. So we need to think differently about their kind of contribution to the project of higher education broadly and equity more specifically. We need time, space, and resources to build equity capacity, knowledge, and skills. We need to think about the rigor involved in methodologically in terms of how we go about advancing equity and really drawing from those robust social justice principles is a good first step because it helps challenge us to think about, okay, we've done redistribution, but have we thought about recognition? Have we thought about representation? Fatima, could you go just back to the slide that you just had, just back one?
Back. You
Back,
have to
yeah.
go back.
Never mind. Okay. I'll try to remember what I was going to say. Just give me a moment because I think I've got these slides myself. So we need to really avoid just thinking only about employability and getting a job. Students who have had to navigate complex inequities really value meaningful work. They want meaningful work, not just any job, but they also want to make a difference. They come to higher education, and my research over decades have shown that they really want to make a difference to their communities, and that's a major motivation for them to access higher education against the odds. And we need to really move away from deficit imaginaries, tokenistic approaches towards a transformative equity praxis framework. So I'll end there. And I do have another slide that just the next slide, Fatima, I'll just say, if you want sort of a resource, these are some possible questions you could use in your communities of praxis, let's call them, so collectively to think through some of the provocations that I've offered this evening or this morning, wherever you are in the world, to think together about what this means for your practices. So thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Paddy. I was looking at your slides and I was looking at what is in there. And if I may, as a layman in this area, I think I was really amazed to see the scope that we still miss out while we're talking about this topic. You're saying these imaginaries, deficit imaginaries, themselves consolidate and further the same agenda that we're trying to demolish. And so, in essence, what I got from your talk was, and correct me if I am wrong, is that we have to rethink literally and reframe and redo all our prior work on this area and start looking at it as an acceptable thing and then bringing it together rather than looking at that there is a diversity, thereby meaning a sub value to a certain component. And there was a time when we used to talk about, now we call them special children, special children. So even then, I'm not comfortable with that the language. I think somewhere the language is insufficient to express how we should relate to these differences. And I think a new sort of a lexicon has to be developed for these things and a new mindset. And even then, though I am very willing to understand and accept what you are saying, somewhere my conditioning does not allow me to really accept the whole in my everyday life. For example, a woman born in 1952 in Pakistan, not allowed to go for education. There was always saying that it was the man that was to be appeased. And I'm sorry if I'm giving that example. To date, despite being where I am unable to wipe out that conditioning that came so many years ago. So I think this is a generational struggle that even if we start today, it will take a lot of time for us to even resolve what we are wanting to do. And it's sad that the world is totally going in another direction. And it's like not trying to correct, it's trying to also have this friction, trying to react and trying to rethink before things even have to happen. And I think it's a tough ask of anybody, but I think we can't stop. I think we have a few questions for you and lots of responses saying it's amazing. And for me, it was really mind blowing because I haven't looked at this topic in this way. And you haven't even touched parts of it. You are saying, what is higher education? Who should decide what it is? And there's so many other questions that are inherent in this debate and discussion that need to be resolved very slowly and gently along the way. Can I have Fatma? Could you please take the name of the person and the questions that come with it, please?
Sure. Dr. Sadif Bashir from Peshawar, she asked if you can speak as to how university free speech policy influence the political equity of students from diverse socio-cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, so I think this is really important because we're seeing how, watching from afar what's happening in the US at the moment, where we're seeing the closure of spaces to be able to speak freely, how it really illuminates what I'm saying here. It's a great lesson in a way to understand how important higher education is in raising issues and having a critical voice and being able to provide the depth of analyses for us to understand broader social issues, urgent issues of our time in UNESCO's words. So I think it shows us how important it is to ensure that we do have the space, the freedom to be able to, the academic freedom to be able to not only have those important insights from academics, but also for our students to be able to participate in that process of being able to have freedom of speech. So it does feel like it's a very raw time in terms of that question. And it's something we really have to defend. I really believe that we have to defend that. Roxana, I just want to say also in relationship to what you were saying, how important it is to me, which I didn't say, but in all the work we do in the Center of Excellence for Equity in Higher Education, which is a Praxis-based center, and we have practitioners and academics working together all the time with community and students, and how much I value the work of practitioners and how, equity practitioners and how much expertise that they bring. And I think it's really important as well to acknowledge that equity practitioners are often peripherized, marginalized, and their voices are also undermined. And so we need to recognize the value of the things we already know. And so I would love from the work that I'm doing to layer into and work together with those knowledges that equity practitioners have and continue to bring to this work.
Yeah. What I was thinking, considering the time, and Penny, what do you think? If we had Helen's sort of talk and then take the questions afterwards, and we can stay on for as long as we want to answer the questions. But I would want us, there are perhaps some questions that, I see like equality and equity. Those are things that, Helen, you are sort of going through in your PowerPoint, and perhaps we could answer some of the questions rather than here. So I think I will invite you, Helen, to sort of come on as our second remarkable speaker. And let me say, I can't express enough thanks for your kind, devote your time and effort to this. Teaching in the science and university, and you actually specialize in environmental geochemistry and sustainability. You also have expertise in science education that allows you to address diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in the broad student base. That's how you do, and you focus on examining these issues in this digital era. You come from it again, like Penny, whose work is entrenched in Praxis. You come from hands-on experience in the classroom, and I think it will be remarkable to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening, everyone. So thank you for participating in this talk. So thank you very much, Penny, for the excellent presentation. So actually, I learned a lot. So as you can tell, I come from the science unit at Mainland University. So I'm a scientist. And so just now I learned from the sociologist. So Penny share a lot on the equality, on the kind of things. So what I'm going to talk about my background a little bit. So I'm from the science unit at Mainland University. So I'm teaching a common.
Helen, you froze. Your screen froze. Perhaps if you sort of close the video, we might be able to. Hello, Helen?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, your screen froze. So perhaps if you go off video, maybe that will improve the connection. What do you think?
So excuse me, I'm gonna share the slides again?
No, yes, please. If you start with the slides, and if you put your, unvideo yourself, I wonder if I'm using the right word. If you close your video, then
cool.
Yeah, then perhaps it will be easier. Yeah, thank you. The connection.
Sure. Thank you.
And put the slides on the slideshow so we can see it larger. So you have very good Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. So I teach the science course to every undergraduate students. So just now we learned from Penny about the theories, about all of the recent work. She's a professional in the equity for many years. She's very experienced. But for me, I'm gonna share from a teacher's perspective. So since in my course, I have 600 students per semester in my course, which means everyone. So the students from different countries, the students from the different year of study, and they're gonna join my course. So I'm gonna share kind of something in the context of Hong Kong and in the context of Mainland China. So I kind of gonna share some of the stories, some of the case study. So here we go. So I'm gonna start with a kind of a quote. So Malala, everyone, we know that, right? So education is the only path to the equality. So here shows my outline. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about what the difference between the inequity and the equality. And then I'm gonna talk about kind of the 3 different approaches to reach or to kind of close to the inequality. And finally, I'm gonna come to the call to action. So I'm gonna start for the first part. So I'm gonna elaborate this with an example. So as I said before, so I'm gonna talk with the example of Hong Kong and then example of Mainland China. So the reason why I choose these 2 kind of place, because I now working in Hong Kong. Actually, I have been in Hong Kong for 20 years. But I was born in Mainland China, so I know both of the places. I think that is both the context I feel most confident with. So I'm going to go through with the first example. So in Hong Kong, you know, the students need to do the whole entrance exam. So when we take the exam, the Chinese language is compulsory for everyone. You know, in the society of Hong Kong, we have the Chinese, and also we have the people from the different parts of the world. We have the Indian, Pakistan, Nepal, the people from the different places. However, the Chinese language is compulsory, which means it's going to be a challenge for these guys, right? So for this kind of problem, we define it as the inequity, so which means it's a system issue. So another one is inequality. So the inequality focuses on the unequal outcome. For example, only 14% of the students from the Pakistan, from the India students, they can pass that Chinese language exam, which is compared to the 75% of the Chinese peers. So this kind of is a focus on the outcome. So to this end, I'm gonna say the inequity is in terms of the nature, is a system issue. For the inequity, it's an outcome based. So in other words, we measure the outcome. So in terms of the solution, if we want to tackle the inequity problem, we kind of change the law, change the justice. For the inequality, we need to kind of relocate, redistribute the risk. So now let me elaborate with another example, which is from the Mainland China. So again, I'm gonna use the exam. So China is a big country. So they have a lot of people take the college entrance exam. But this exam is very important to every single student. However, this exam favors the students in the big cities. So now let me show you with an example. So students from Beijing only needs to 580 out of, so this the full mark is 750. So this is the entrance score for the Beijing students to enter the top university in China, which is the Peking University. However, if a students from the Henan province, so that's the name of the place, of the province. So if they want to enter the Peking University, they need 100 extra credits to enter that university. So we call this kind of scenario as inequity. so which is a system issue. So not as in terms of the inequality, so we use the term of the outcome. So for example, according to a report 2 years ago, so 70% of the Peking University freshmen, they come from the China top 10 big cities, the most rich cities. Yeah, so to wrap up, so the inequity is kind of the root. So it's because of the biased policy, the biased laws, biased regulations. But the inequality is kind of the fruit, the outcome. For example, the students, they got the lower score, so on and so forth. So that's kind of my first part of the first session. So in my talk, I'm going to talk about the inequity. Yeah. So let's see, I'm going to use a cartoon. So actually, I got this cartoon from the website. So here you can refer to the source. So the equality, that means we're going to give everyone the same letter. So as you can see, this guy, this really, really big guy, once he got the letter for everyone, it's the same. So for the big guy, once you got the letter, of course, you can see the beautiful scenery outside of the wall. But for the, for this girl, it works okay for the girl in pink, for this girl. But however, with the guy in the wheelchair, it's kind of useless if you give this kind of letter, right? But for the equity, we're gonna give the people who kind of according to the people's need. So if you need taller letter, we're gonna give you the taller one. So the goal is help everyone to see the beautiful scenery outside the wall. So in my talk, I'm gonna talk about the inequity. So this is the talk, changing the inequity to the inclusive and holistic student development. So now I'm gonna talk about kind of the three part. So I'm gonna elaborate from the inclusive pedagogy, holistic development, and the strategies. So I'm gonna start with the inclusive pedagogy. So in this session, I'm gonna talk about two parts, the cultural responsive. So Patty also mentioned about this, the teaching, and also the universal design for learning. So for the CRT, so I'm gonna say it, the CRT, the cultural responsive teaching. So again, I'm gonna use the Hong Kong example and one Hong Kong example and one Mainland China example. So for the let's call it the minority students. So what Hong Kong did, they used the bilingual curriculum. So they hire the local language speaking teaching assistant to help the minority students. And also in their lesson, especially in the history lesson, they include how the South Asia helped to build the society of Hong Kong. So they include this kind of component to let the minority students feel inclusive in the society of Hong Kong. So they are a part of the society. So this kind of approach shows the outcome is pretty encouraging. So for example, their Chinese exam, the pass rate increased from 8% to 24%. And also the students are more engaging in the class attendance. So another example is from China. So that's from a big city, as some of you may know. So that's it's the #1 big city of we call Shanghai. So in Shanghai is a big city. So there are some people, they migrate to Shanghai, and the migrant children, they kind of feel difficult to adopt the school life in Shanghai. So what the schools in Shanghai, what they did is they do the storytelling. They try to kind of let those students, let the migrant children to share their experience by the art and by drawing the pictures or by writing. So they share their experience with the whole class. So the students kind of be more inclusive, more engaged in their learning. And the second approach, what they do is the parents-teacher partnership. So and they ask the migrant children to share their cultural festivals, or what they do in their rural area. So the outcome is the sense of belonging increased 40%, and also the academic performance increased as well. So in terms of the universal design for learning, so we say UDL. So the thing is, the example of the China is they use the AI powered. So for now, everyone, not only the higher education, but also the primary or secondary school education, everyone is kind of fascinating by the AI. So they use the AI. One of the tools they use is called Squirrel AI. That's the name of the platform of the app. So they use the Squirrel AI to analyze the students' performance. And then, for example, some of the students they learn by the visual aids, and some of the students they learn by reading. Some of the students they learn by writing and by listening. So according to their the school gonna give the tailored exercise for the students. And also they use the multiple formats of the delivery, so to try to meet the students' different kind of the learning needs, the learning style. So there increase the mathematics score of 22%, and less students kind of drop out from the school. So as for the Hong Kong, they kind of do a very similar work, and they try to use the flexible assignments. Again, it echoes this example right here. They use either the students, the students can choose. They can either write an essay, or they record a podcast, or they design poster, or even they make a video as assignment. And also they give the sensory friendly classroom. For example, they allow the noisy canceling headphones and learning desk, etc. And so it encouraged the participation of the students from 50% to 85%. And the score also increased by 12%. So if I'm going to try to wrap up a little bit for the cultural responsive teaching and the universal design for learning. So the objective for the cultural one is it kind of introduce the culture, it bridges the cultural gaps, and it can enforce the students' cultural identity. And for the universal design of learning, this approach removes the systematic barrier, and it allows accessibility. So both of the approach, they require the system investment. They require kind of, which, for example, the teachers training, the more funding, or the policy, the change of the policy. Yeah, so now so I understand. So many of you, you are from the university, you are the students, or you are the colleagues, you are the professors, instructors of the university. So I invite you to try to reflect. So how might your institute, your college, your school, the policy unintentionally mirror the inequity? So how might your classroom design this is kind of, no one gonna tends to do that, but unintentionally favor one culture over the other. So now here we comes to the holistic development. So in this part, I'm gonna talk about two issues. So the first approach is we're gonna try to address, many different kind of things, which include the academic, emotion, social, physical, which means besides of the academic, we're going to try to include more. This is the approach number one. So approach number two is we integrate the lifestyle, and also we include the community. So I'm going to share these two approaches, again, with examples from Hong Kong and Mainland China as well. So for the first one, so when we address the students' performance, not only from the academic, but also include the emotional, social, and physical needs. So for Mainland China, so this is an example of the from the rural China from rural area of China. So they want to develop whole child project. So in that project, the target audience is the left behind children. So now I need to explain what do I mean by the left behind children. You know, in China, we have the big cities like Beijing, like Shanghai. So a lot of the parents, they go to Beijing or Shanghai for a better salary. So when the parents are working in the big cities, the children, they are left behind. So the children are going to be taken care of by the grandparents. So we call those children are the left behind children. Okay, so those left behind children is becoming a kind of a bigger and bigger issue in the Chinese society. So the reason is that the grandparents, they may not, they are may not that energetic, and they may not can help children with their assignments, and they cannot talk with the children because of the big age difference. So what this project is trying to do is they're gonna try to address this issue from the 4 different perspectives. So from the academic perspective, they have the after school tutoring. So the volunteers, they're gonna help students with their assignments, with their homework. So of the emotion, they have the regular counseling service. And so to talk about the children, especially the teenagers. And for the social, they have the group farming projects to apply what they learned in the school to their real life scenario. For example, they do the farming. And the last one is the physical. It's a free daily, so they financial support, or they can help the children with the sports and so on and so forth. And also they get very encouraging outcome. So in terms of Hong Kong, so we have a project weekend. We help the kind of the underprivileged students. Also, it's from the academic, emotional, social, and physical perspectives. And also we got the very positive feedback, very positive outcome. So the second approach I'm gonna share with is the integrate the life skill, mental health, and it's gonna include the community. So the example of China is from Guangdong, and that's the name of the province. So in that place, the vocational students, they're gonna often their lack of the life skill, and they have low self-esteem. They think they are not as smart as the university students, and they think they're less competitive than the university students. So what this project is trying to do is they try to give the course on the life skill, for example, on the financial literacy, on the writing skills, on the public speech. You know, when they kind of interview for the job, you're gonna need some of the job, they're going to test your writing skills, or they're going to test your public speech skills. And also they have the trainings, the enhancement workshop for the mental health. And also they use the community engagement. They have the internship, apprenticeship with the local factories and the startups. So the results is the students, the employee rate increased from the 55% to more than 80%. And the students, the self-confidence increased more than 30%. So in terms of Hong Kong, they have the joyful at school, and they have the mental health program. So the kind of the background is a number of the students, they have the mental issues, especially during the COVID-19, and the number increased like a quarter. So and kind of the society on the school, they know this is a very serious problem, and what they do is they, of course, first they train the teacher and they give the peer support network. And also they share with the students in the workshop for the life skills, and also they cooperate with the community. They have a number of the NGOs. So here in Hong Kong, we have a number of the NGO. They are very actively participant in the cooperate with the universities, with the schools. And so, excuse me. and they got very promising results as well. So if I'm going to try to summarize both the holistic approach and also holistic approach here and also the community engagement. So the holistic approach is they try to tackle the student's problem from the multidimensional, which include the academic and also beyond the academic. And for the community engagement, they try to kind of connect the students, bridging the students with the real world. Yeah, I'm gonna invite you guys to reflect. So how might your institute, the definition of the success shift if you're gonna use the holistic development? For now, at least for in our Chinese culture, we kind of put the scores, put the academic performance at the very, very top. So if we gonna introduce the holistic development, how are we gonna kind of change our definition of the success? So this is a good question to think about. So now here it comes to the strategies for transformation. So I'm gonna elaborate this from the three terms of from the three perspective. So I'm gonna start with the system change. And so for the system change, I'm gonna quote a example from Chongqing, which is the southwest of China. So they introduced an equitable fund model. So the background is the rural schools, they receive much less, 1/3 less funding than the urban schools. So what the government did is they do the system change. They give the cost of equity fund formula. So after the implementation of this funding, they got a 25% of increase in the teachers' retention, 5% score. Although it's not very significant, but it's a big difference in the increase of the teachers' retention. So in terms of Hong Kong, we got the partnership with the families and community. So as I introduced before, so in Hong Kong, we got a lot of the NGOs. They partner with the schools, with the universities, and they host a number of the workshops for the minority students, and the students. Hold on a sec. And the results is the parents are more active, engaged in the schoolwork, in the school committees, and is increased from 5% to 40%. So that's a big increase. And also the students, the dropout rate decreased by 18%. So in terms of classroom practice, the differentiation, instruction, and trauma-informed approaches was adopted in China. So that is for the migrant students as well. So they use the flexible seating and they use the weekly counseling. I echo what I shared before. So it got a pretty good outcome. So maybe so I know there are some instructors or professors in this talk. So it's kind of one of the practice we may do in our daily teaching practice. So another thing Hong Kong did is the school added novels by the minorities students. So by including the novels from the Pakistan writers, from the Indian writers. So for the new writers, they're gonna let the students more inclusive in their study. And the last point I want to share is we implement the technology in the teaching practice. So as we addressed before, so we include the AI and to kind of make a tailored learning path. For example, we use visual learners, and we let the students who learn by listening, and then you give the audio materials, so on and so forth. And for And so another thing I want to share is during the pandemic, so there are a quarter of the low-income students, they do not have the computer or they don't have the internet, and then they have trouble with the online classes. So what the government did is the government partnered with the industry, with the telecom companies, and they provide free tablets and also the internet to help a number of the 50,000 families. So of course, the attendance of the online class is not a problem by then. Yeah. So the time to reflect is which kind of strategy could your class or your institute adapt in the next few years? Yeah. So and the final part of my presentation gonna goes to the call to action. So I'm gonna see 3 points. The first point is try to examine your curriculum. For example, try to ask yourself, so whose voice are missing in your course material? And are the marginal groups represented? So I'm gonna share one of example is me, so as I introduced at the very beginning. So I teach a huge class. I teach a 600 students class every semester. So in my course, one of the biggest assignment for my course is I ask students to do a research project. So when the students do the research project, I give I give the flexibility to the students. So they can choose the topic as long as it's related to the SDG, the 17 SDG goals. And they can combine, I encourage them to combine their major, their culture, their discipline with the course. So this is one of the things we do. So the second point I'm going to share is start a student listening circle. So try to establish a regular interaction with students. So one of the things I do in my course is, of course, I have, for example, for now, for this term, I have my current students. And what I do is, besides of the current students, I'm gonna ask the previous students, I'm gonna invite them as a peer mentors. So they're gonna kind of help. They're gonna partner with the current students. So I have 600 students in my course. And although I have the teaching assistant, but still it's not enough. I need the helpers. So I ask these guys, the students who had taken my course before, I invite them as a peer mentor. They can help with the current students. And also, I have the mock students, which is the teaching assistant. So they're gonna sit in my class. They're gonna try to listen the voices of the students. So I call this as a listening circle. I try to collect the students' ideas, the feedback, their comments. So the last point I want to share with you guys is partnership with the local organization. So for example, I'm a scientist. I was trained with the data, with the figures, with the graphs. So I'm kind of, the scientist is kind of famous for the code. We have no feelings, right? So I want to be sensible. I want to be empathetic. So I cooperate with a number of NGOs. So I want them to kind of deliver the part I miss in my science course. And also the example I share with you here is the secondary schools, they cooperate with the Hong Kong Unison, and they help with the minority students. Yeah. So to conclude, so I'm gonna say the equity is not a destination. It's a continuous journey of listening, adapting, growing, and adjusting. So it's a continuous journey. And the equity is not a checklist, it's a mindset. So we should start small and we should start from today. So thank you very much. So this is my presentation.
Helen, you have unpacked such a lot of simple stuff that we think is simple. And yet there were so many things that you could explain, that were clear. And I realized, especially from Pakistan, lots of educators were finding it remarkable and finding it easy to understand how your examples, you try to give an example, a practical example with everything. And so it really made it, sort of easy for them to understand, to chew, and to start. I think each of us as educators in our own play or as academic leaders will have different uh, prisms and lenses or from which to view this and how to take it forward, and each will have a role. But like Penny's, PowerPoint and her discourse, made me realize that there is a lot of, even if we think that we need to do something about diversity that is meaningful, sustainable, impactful, we are yet not on the same page about what we want to do and how we want to do it. All of us carry our own ideas about what is going to be the way forward for us. And I think Helen, your PowerPoint gave the message that no matter what level it is, no matter where we are, that start is good enough. And it will at some point take us towards a collective, whole where things might come. Even if they are in islands and disjointed now, they will start coming together. And that's the way we need to keep along. You talked about holistic development, and I see, I don't want to say that there's something we use in our part of the world. We are very eager for spiritual development to be a part. And I think when you talk about whole person and outside campus, I think that probably covers it. Because to be well-being, I think I would cover it as a part of well-being. For human well-being, if your faith, if your whatever theory, your theology you take forward that gives you peace is your well-being. And sort of we also allow that. Hopefully that should flourish. There are quite a few questions, some simple, some a little bit more on the understanding phase. Fatma, if you could start looking at those. We have 487 participants. I must thank you all for being with us. This was not a small amount of time that you have dedicated, and I'm thoroughly enjoying Southwestern University, Melanie, trying to keep awake in the morning and all there. And so I'm very impressed with that, Melanie from America. Fatima.
We have a question from Sayyid Saqlain Raza. How can we ensure that leaders in higher education not only advocate for, but also model diversity, equity, and inclusion values in their daily practices?
Yeah, I think, Helen, I'd like you to answer that question, and then Penny can sort of add in what is left. G. Because you talk about lots of strategies, Helen, in your PowerPoint, and you have given examples. So perhaps if you start with that, and then Penny can add on.
Yeah. May I have the question again?
Yeah.
What's the question, please?
Yes. How can higher education institutions better support the well-being of students and staff? This is the modified question, but from the same person. Well-being of students and staff as part of their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what practices can be implemented to ensure a holistic approach to well-being?
Right. Yeah. Again, I may leave this to Penny for the professional answers. So for me, I'm gonna share from the teacher's perspective. Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna share some practice what our university is doing. So I'm gonna talk about from the teachers, from the course instructor's perspective. So in our course, when we design the course, so the university gonna have a guideline. So you're gonna make sure your course material is inclusive. You will not kind of miss this group behind. So that is one of the things for the course instructor. And also we have the office of the student affairs. So those guys, the Office of Student Affairs, they're gonna arrange a number of the cultural activities, the kind of the gender equality kind of activities and events to make sure everyone is kind of treated equally. And also we have the so-called the Internationalization Day. So, we have the students from basically all over around the world. So we have the Internationalization Day. So on that day, the students from the different countries are gonna show up their costume, their food, their songs, their culture. So it's kind of the things I can learn. And also, another thing, we have the so in case the students have the special learning needs, so we have a system to alert every instructor. So we have a system. So for example, this student is a special learning needs student. So all of the course instructors, we're gonna get the email. So please be aware this student is a special learning needs, and please help him or her on this, and that. We know that. Yeah, so that we can talk personally with the students, and then we can accommodate, for example, the more time for the assignments, or they are gonna have, we refer the students to the counseling. Yeah, of course, we have the counseling service of the university. Actually, a number of the students are using that service. It's very helpful. Yeah, that's basically what I can share. Thank you.
Yes, Penny, over to you.
Well, I think there's two parts to the question. So the first part was about the leadership. How can we create more inclusive leadership, I think was the question. I can't quite remember now what it was, but I think it's an important question because we often focus only on, as I said, our focus tends to be on individual students who are facing disadvantage and not on the practices that we take up. So what do we think about how we recognize leadership? What forms of leadership do we promote? And who is the leader? And so if we lead differently and we model a more inclusive approach to leadership, I think it means being able to walk the talk and, be able to lead in a more compassionate and caring way, not only for our students, but also for our staff and the kinds of cultures that we facilitate, where people feel a sense of belonging, that their voices are heard, that they're part of the process of creating things, that they're generating practices that make a difference, and so on. So I think leadership is really, really important, and sometimes, again, taken for granted. I had read something earlier after I was speaking, or during when I was speaking, about lots of people feel overwhelmed by having to do yet another thing. And I think Helen's examples were so helpful and practical. But if the institution doesn't give everybody the opportunity to develop those practices, then it can be very intimidating and overwhelming for staff. So, like I said before, we absolutely need to be provided with, if an institution is serious about equity, it needs to provide its staff with the support, the professional training, education, and the time and space to think about their practices in the way that Helen was talking about. So, these are really important things, not only for the well-being of our students, but the well-being of our staff too. And I think students are they're very sensitive. They know when their teachers are feeling alienated or that the culture is not inclusive. And so investing in the development of our staff and being able to support them to be more equitable is absolutely essential, I think, to making the change that is needed to be made.
If I butt in, I think what I get from where we are in Pakistan, we are still at a very initial stage of realizing there are some things that need to be leveled. And I see that in many countries of the world, that discourse has been going on for quite some time. I think even having said that, in all parts of the world, the need for awareness, the need for acquisition of the to take that forward, the need to sort of have metrics and frameworks that work for that, equity framework, those things, they're still to be done in a collective global manner. All of us are doing our thing. Our contexts are different. What you think will be equitable practice perhaps in your country might not be the same for my country, and it might not bode well because the context is different. And I think gender identities is a classic example where there was a lot of disruption in my part of the world by the convention. I'm not placing a value judgment on one thing or another. I'm just saying that, like, leadership is at another level from where policies flow, be it at the government level, political level, or the institutional academic level. And I think that those things will still vary and go different paths, even when we talk among each others as equals and as all of us targeting equity. G. Fatma, the next question.
Yes, Penny, I believe this question is for you. How can we measure and evaluate the effectiveness of redistributive equity policies? How can we resolve conflict with the interest of shareholders?
What was the last part? How can we
resolve conflict with the interest of shareholder?
Yes. I mean, that's a really, that's a very complicated question. So it comes back to what I was saying about methodology. So how we evaluate needs some deep thinking about what is it we're trying to evaluate. How are we constructing the problem that we're trying to evaluate, and who decides, who participates in that? So one of the things that I would argue for is a participatory approach to evaluation that includes the people that are, part of the programs that we're evaluating, so that they have a voice in the process of determining what is being measured and how we measure it. And that might involve not just quantitative data collection, which is really important and helpful to look at patterns of inclusion and exclusion and so on, but also qualitative data collection, which allows the voices of people's experiences to be heard and then to be thought through in terms of the ongoing development of a program. How do you resolve divisions amongst different stakeholders is another interesting question. So if you can bring people together to talk through those differences, there may be growing understanding of the different contexts or perspectives that people are bringing. So that might help resolve those differences. But see, all of this takes resources. So it comes back to redistribution. And that's why I think we have to hold together redistribution. So it's not just redistribution for our students, it's also redistribution for our staff to be able to do this work well, to be able to do this work with rigor and with quality in mind. So, how we evaluate is really important because it has implications for the way that we make decisions about what we should do in the future.
Yeah.
I should also just add that we actually talk at great length about evaluation in our book. So that's one of the key aspects that we look at is evaluation.
G, over to you.
We have a question for you. How does inequitable access to quality education impact students' long-term academic and career trajectories?
Is that for me or for Helen?
For Helen.
Helen, over to you. Can you state the question again, Fatima?
How does inequitable access to quality education impact students' long-term academic and career trajectories?
That's what we talked about. Please unmute, Helen.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess the inequity gonna have a kind of the long term, a very, let's use the term of the sustainable, very long term impact on the students' performance. So it's kind of a exclusion. So once people kind of, you cannot be a part of the community, you're gonna it gonna hurt your self-esteem. It gonna hurt not only the academic performance, but also the whole person. So I think that's gonna be a really bad impact on the person. Yeah.
We have another question. How can schools ensure that emotional and social competencies are given equal weight as academic performance, especially in under-resourced settings?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. So also as I said before, so in the Chinese culture that are gonna be very, very challenging since we value the academic, the high scores. Um, but for now, so what my course is trying to do is I relax the scores. I kind of remove. There's no exam in my course. So because my course is required for every student, so I remove the exam. I try to allow the creativity and then the innovation in my course. So I kind of judge the students' performance based on academic performance, and of course, but not the major part. And they are gonna judge them by the teamwork, by the innovation and creativity. So I try to put the things kind of more diverse. So this is what we are doing in the course.
I think there's a question, if I may go on to thank you, Helen, for that there's a need for the leadership to be decolonized for promoting, and this is in our context, Pakistani context. And for this, just to give you an idea, Penny and Helen, I think the problem in my country is we are further removed in higher education from our own context because we are taught West-centric, text West-centric. There's very little research that happens in our own context. So unfortunately, whoever becomes a leader in whatever capacity has been through a whole pipe of, like West-centric thought, West-centric frameworks, West-centric language. And we have been very, very lazy. That's all I can say. And it's criminal that we have not developed our own frameworks. And so the problem is that those at the top do not know any other because they are removed from the context. Our higher education student does not know what 20 miles outside happens in the community, in a rural community. We are that removed. So I think there is a generic problem over there, which actually perpetuates our inequities and lack of connect with the reality. So if I hope, Zoya, that answered your question, and it will mean that we all have to be more vigilant in doing researching our own context and developing our own frameworks to teach. Till then time, it will be cannot be decolonized totally. We do have that history. Fatma, you see a poll on the thing. We do not mean to stop the questioning, but this polling is there are two questions. And so please, if you could respond to those, it will make our assessment about the webinar easy to share. But in the meantime, we'll continue with the questions. Fatma, you
We
go
have
on.
a lot of questions asking the same thing. How do we handle equity fatigue when people feel overwhelmed by the topic or disengaged?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Penny?
That's what I was kind of referring to earlier. I think that's a really important question. The work that I had cited briefly was from a project that we have done with staff and students about how they relate to equity. And a lot of people who are undertaking the work of equity and doing such amazing work are feeling unrecognized. They're feeling misrecognized because that work is not necessarily highly valued by the institution. And also there's a lot of resentments, I think, for people who feel overstretched, that they can't do another thing, and they don't feel supported to be able to understand what they need to do. So I think, we really do need webinar series like this, quite frankly, to be able to support staff, to be able to understand, how they develop those capacities to do equity work, but also that we have resources in institutions that recognize the importance of this work, that it's not just a peripheral thing that you sort of throw in at the last minute. So it comes back to my point. We actually need transformation of our systems and our structures, our funding systems, for example, to ensure that there are the resources institutionally to support this work. So it's very difficult because individuals who are burdened in a way to undertake this work, it can be very lonely. And I think this is why I'm encouraging, as much as possible to work together collectively, find people who are allies, people who you connect with. And, I think there's energy to be found there to find your people, to find the collective voice and the collective advocacy that this work is really important, and to explain why it's important, that our students are important to our institutions, and therefore we need to recognize and we need to have the capacity to do that, whether that's in our teaching, our assessment, our curriculum development, or our leadership practices. So I think that we need to recognize that fatigue, acknowledge it, and understand that it's real, and it's because of systematic lack of resources, lack of recognition. And it's interesting what Helen was saying about, academic grades and outcomes being most highly valued. This is exactly what I'm referring to as the unequal cultural value order. If we don't value emotion and our social selves in schools and in universities, then it's very hard for individuals to be able to engage with that and make a difference. So we need more collective change, is my argument.
Yeah, Helen, would you like to add something to this, or we move to the next question? Helen? Oh, is she dropped? I think she's dropped. Her line dropped. Can you go on to the next question, Fatima?
Yes, we have a very philosophical question asking if any society can ever achieve complete equality.
That's the
Well, that's what we're striving towards.
Yeah.
I think, this is the thing, it's a process. And, I think that we often feel overwhelmed because there are such enormous problems, in our society, in our countries, in our local context, and in the world. And it can be overwhelming. So I think it's about recognizing one step at a time, building our understanding and knowledge one step at a time, and looking for our allies and making connections with people who boost our energy and can help us to think through some of the challenges that we're facing, whether that's with our students or with our peers or other staff members or our communities. We can find those connections to help strive towards change. But I think that it's an ongoing process. It's not something that it's all finished, it's all done. It's about the process. It's about the commitment. It's about the dedication to what we love to do, which is to educate and to work with others.
Yeah. As we know, in my country, we're still struggling with 100% literacy and education. So when I look at the landscape, my problem is we make them literate, and then there are these other issues that need to be brought into the discussion as well. So it actually ups the game for us. How do we bring, with limited resource constraints like you talked about, how do we do that in a country becomes a massive uphill task? But I'm sure we need like-minded people to come together and hopefully be able to devise ways of, because there are lots of questions, I think, in the chat that are asking how to do it. And how by itself, Penny and Helen, is a huge discourse by itself, because like diversity, how and the different facets that you have to address are not just one or two. There's this whole multiple dimensions, multiple layers in every dimension that need to be tackled and thought about for sustainable and impactful change. Ji, Fatima, other questions?
I think this is all.
Okay.
We have
If
other
the-
questions, but I believe they have already been answered.
Yeah, let us ask if there are other questions, and would you like to sort of, we will unmute you, please, if you raise your hand. We'll unmute you and you can ask. We are already coming to end of our time, and there are still 400 of us. So that's a very, we would honor your being here with us and take it a little. Both the experts have agreed to stay on to satisfy your questions. G, if you raise your hand, we'll be G, Professor Sophia Anwar. And please, may I say that perhaps comments are okay in the chat. Only ask short, concise questions so that G, Sophia, if you have a question, please. Sophia Anwar from Government College, University of Faisalabad. Please unmute her, Gohar. Gohar, you are not on your task. Could you please unmute Sophia? Nafe, if you could
I've given the
write your
permission.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I audible to the audience, please?
Yes, please, you are.
Yeah. I just want to have one line that it was a very commendable presentation by the both presenter, but the issue that even I have mentioned here that I was recently dealing with one project related to the female from the minority to the university education and to the college education. And what I faced that it was not only the other factor that we say the lack of inclusiveness from the institution or the lack of inclusiveness from the teacher. There are certain other factors that are inbuilt from their own society, mean their economic resources, their cultural, how we can overcome those issues that are very difficult for a teacher, for the administration to interfere in that realm.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we are very much bound by that, what you can say, the certain rules of those that we cannot enter there.
Yeah, I think that was something that I clarified very early on, that our context has a very strong bind. Our personality is made by the home we came from, and we have to perform within that circle where we move. And there are many things that we cannot break away because of the way we are within those, otherwise there would be chaos. And I do not know how Penny and Helen feel, but I do feel that if there are singular or sporadic actions of retaliation towards those norms that are very constraining, I agree, there will be chaos. And unless there is a resolution in mind, which is amicable to both sides, I think there will be a conflict in society. And for that, there has to be a long-term strategy, and people like us perhaps will have to leave it to other generations to reap the benefits of what we are doing now. We will have to start a path, a gentle path, which does not create attrition in the society. G. Penny and Helen, if you would like to.
I want to just give you one, what you can say, the real world situation. In my university, we are offering particularly 2% quota for the minorities. And previous 10 years, if I count, there were more than 250, what you can say, the seats offered for those. Last year, we offered 50 seats. There were only 27 applicants. Rather, there must be 200 to 400. And there is a one administration requirement that we have to get their data, that their parental ID card and like this. None of those 27, they appeared in the interview, only 5 they appeared in the interview. Then how the administration can put the energy to bring them out of their home? So for this, the demand side factors, there must be a synchronization between the both mean those, either it is from minority, from the poor, there must be some community structure.
Yeah, Sophia, I agree. You have given the answer yourself. It doesn't happen with a strategy being offered. There is a long-term pre-preparation towards that the university should also think about. I think we'll give other people a chance. These are questions that need to be resolved with people. But what we are asking now are like more conceptual clarity right now. There will be hopefully times where we can come together at communities of practice. It should be a very important point that you have raised. Nafe, if you can only do it in one line, a question towards the participants rather than sharing or comments, please.
Ma'am, I ask a question. Should education to free to add our level of equality?
Sorry, say that again. Should education
be completely free at all level up to promote equality?
Should education be free at all levels of?
To promote equality?
No, I don't think a free education. It's like the question that Penny asked, I think, is what sort of education? Education that's free.
Types of education.
There is a lot of echo in your thing. I think you have multiple, if you could write down your question, perhaps it would be easy. There's a lot of echo at your end. Did you understand, Penny or Helen?
What's the question? Should education be free? If it's equitable, is that the question? Because I think it's an important question.
Yes,
it is about it's what you're pointing towards is the question of redistribution, and ultimately the best ideal situation would be that everybody has the opportunity to study at university for free. I think that is the best funding situation that we could imagine. But I do think that it's more than just about the cost of higher education. And that's why all of those dimensions I pointed out are equally important. So it's not just about the financial and economic dimensions. It's also about who sees themselves as being, as having potential to participate in higher education, and how decisions are made about how to admit students into higher education. So I've done work around selection processes, which are deeply exclusionary, even when admissions tutors are trying to be fair and transparent. And I don't have time to talk about that now, but I think it's just, I guess the key message I'd like to give is that it's not just about redistribution. It's definitely that's important, but it's also about those other dimensions as well that make a difference to who sees themselves and who is seen as having the right to higher education. Roxana, I'm going to have to leave quite soon. I'm really sorry.
It must be very late. We'll call it a day. I see that Ahmed Hussain has a question. If you put it in the thing, in the chat, it would be easy, and Helen can sort of answer to it, and then we'll call it to a close. Just to clarify that, Helen, when you talk about higher education, please note that this is not necessarily a university education. A higher education, anything that you do after your higher secondary, any certification, any qualification, is a higher education degree, and it depends on, it's required for what sort of task you go to. Ahmed Hussain, very quickly, because for Penny, it is already probably 10 o'clock at night, 10 p.m. at night, and it's unfair. Now, that's not a fair distribution of care. G.
Okay,
Helen.
I have very short questions. The relationship between inequality and competence is complex, with some arguing that certain level of inequality can drive innovation and growth. So, what is your view on that?
Thank you for that question. I think that's a great question. It's not that competition in itself is a bad thing. It's about what we're encouraging in terms of a very individualistic notion of competition, which then takes away the aspects of understanding that we actually need cooperation and collaboration for our future well-being. And that's part of education, learning about our place in the world and so on. So it's not that we take away competition, because I think competition is sometimes a very healthy thing to have, but it's a much more I suppose, ethical approach to competition that we need to build in terms of how we understand the relationship of competition to equity.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect answer, but it's what I'm not saying that we should never have competition. I'm talking about very particular. I talked about hyper individualistic forms of competition in which individual success is only seen as the main driver. And I think that is unhealthy for equity agendas.
Helen, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, I think no, I think it's good. Yeah, the only point I want to add is I can't agree more with Penny. So the institution level or the government level of the policy is very essential to kind of tackle the equity problem. Yeah.
If I may add, I think there's also a basic difference of Eastern philosophy and the Western philosophy of a good functioning society. And for an equitable setup where the West demands, and now things are changing, a more individualistic, focused or facing approach, whereby the competition became very, very deadly, like Emmett is, pointing to that fact. In Eastern societies, and that is why we have lost our essences, it was always the collective. It was not the individual that was the focus. It was the collective that was the focus, the community, the family, the society in which you function. And I think in our countries which have been colonized and are which still not being decolonized appropriately by our education systems, we are still in that mold where we look at competition as one person again. Why can't it be a competition that I will work harder and have more, put in more time? Why can't I have a competition that I'll be more sincere than the other to my work? And why can't I have competition of so many other things rather than a competition that means drag you down and put myself up? So I think there are those things which in our society we are losing the traditional touch. It is alien to our mindset. And that is why we are confused and we are unable to find which way to go. I think, first of all, we in our context have to define who we are, what our traditional values are, and they are very, very actually acceptable of the other. And that's the strange part, is that we are starting to lose them. I do not remember ever that we had any concept of the other when I was growing up. And now there are things that I am unable to walk down the road in a certain garb and I'll be questioned. And I don't remember that happening. So I think there are lots of things that we have to correct within our context, and the answers are within us. And we just need to know what the frameworks are, what the idea is, what the knowledge is out there, but then apply it within our own context. And I think that's where we make it. I am sorry for taking too much time. I must thank 324 of you for your patience. These sessions are kind of, 2 hours long, but Penny, if I may, I'm totally, your dedication to this topic, your spirit, the way you responded straight away to us is unmatched. And we were so impressed here at our CLT because we had wrote to many experts And you literally were the first one who said, yes, I am in. And that's another spirit of knowledge equity that you and Helen have showed. Helen also came in a bit later because it took us time to find her, but there was never sort of a pause on that or anxiety on that. It was, yes, I am in. And I cannot thank you enough for the honor both of you have given us, and by allowing us to allow these, to open it up to so many others who will learn and benefit. And a little bit is a long way to go, and together we'll do something. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the dedicated 323 of you that are still out there. Melanie, I am very, very impressed with you. I must meet you one day. And you are from America, and there is Penny, it's a sleep time, and you are now going to get ready to go to work. So my lots of love and hugs to all of you. May it be a better world for all of us tomorrow. Thank you so much to each one of you. Thank you. Thank you. And bye-bye.